The distress signal came through at 3 in the morning, ship time. Commander Lucy Hart was already awake, sitting alone in the mess hall with a cup of cold coffee. Sleep had never come easy to her, not since she started flying the deep routes 10 years ago. The darkness between stars had a way of keeping a person's eyes open. She heard the alarm before anyone else, a sharp beeping sound that cut through the quiet hum of the Starward's engines. Lucy set down her cup and walked to the bridge with steady steps. She had answered hundreds of distress calls in her career. Most were false alarms. Some were pirates trying to lure ships into traps. But protocol was protocol, and Lucy Hart followed the rules. The signal came from a small moon at the edge of the system. The computer identified the source as a transport ship. Lucy felt her stomach tighten at that name. They were not a species that sent distress signals. They were warriors, proud and fierce, standing nearly 8 feet tall with golden fur and claws that could tear through metal. The Galactic Council called them one of the most dangerous races in known space. They did not ask for help. They did not show weakness. Something very bad must have happened. Lucy pressed the intercom button. "Ben, Grace, get up here. We have a situation." Her pilot, Ben, arrived first. He was a thin man with tired eyes and quick hands on the controls. He had flown with Lucy for 6 years and trusted her judgment without question. Grace, the ship's medic, came next. She was small but strong, with a calm voice that could steady anyone in a crisis. They gathered around the navigation screen and studied the coordinates. The moon was 2 hours away at full speed. The signal was weak but steady, repeating the same automated message over and over. Crash landing. Survivors unknown. Request immediate assistance. Ben said slowly, "Commander, are we really going to answer this?" "We answer every call," Lucy replied. "That is what we do." "But even their children are dangerous. If there are survivors, they might not want our help. They might see us as a threat." Lucy understood his concern. Humans and had never been close. The warrior species looked down on humans as soft and weak, barely worth noticing. But Lucy had not spent her life in space to turn away from people in need, no matter what species they were. "Set the course," she said. "We will figure out the rest when we get there." The Starward jumped to faster-than-light speed and raced toward the distant moon. Lucy spent the journey reading everything she could find about biology, culture, and customs. She learned about their pride structure, their strict codes of honor, and their belief that strength was the only virtue that mattered. She learned that mothers protected their young with a ferocity that bordered on madness, and that cubs stayed with their mothers until they were old enough to enter military training. She learned that orphaned cubs were rare because ships almost never fell. When the Starward dropped out of hyperspace, Lucy saw the wreckage immediately. The transport ship had hit the moon's surface hard, carving a long scar across the gray rock before coming to rest in a shallow crater. Smoke still rose from the broken hull. Pieces of metal lay scattered across the ground like fallen leaves. "No life signs from the main section," Grace reported, studying her scanner. "But I am picking up something faint near the rear cargo hold. Multiple heartbeats, small, weak." Lucy suited up without hesitation. Ben argued that she should let him go first, but she shook her head. If there were survivors, they would be scared and possibly injured. A calm voice and gentle hands would matter more than caution. She stepped out of the airlock and onto the moon's surface. The gravity was light, maybe half of Earth's standard, and she had to move carefully to keep her balance. The wreckage loomed ahead, twisted and silent. Lucy walked toward it with her heart beating fast in her chest. She found the cargo hold at the back of the ship. The door had been torn open by the impact, leaving a gap just wide enough for her to squeeze through. Inside, the darkness was thick and heavy. Lucy turned on her helmet light and swept the beam across the room. She saw the bodies first. 2 adult, their golden fur stained dark with blood. They had died on impact, their massive frames crumpled against the walls. Lucy felt a wave of sadness wash over her. Even warriors deserved better than this. Then she heard the sound. A tiny whimper, so soft she almost missed it. Lucy moved toward the noise, stepping over debris and broken containers. Her light found a corner where cargo crates had fallen together, creating a small, sheltered space. And there, huddled beneath the body of a third adult, she found them. Three cubs, no larger than house cats, pressed together in a trembling pile. Their eyes were wide and golden, reflecting her light like tiny mirrors. Their fur was matted with ash and dust. The smallest one opened its mouth and let out a sound that was probably meant to be a roar but came out as a squeaky creak. Lucy dropped to her knees. She could see now that the adult above them was female, her body curved protectively even in death. This was their mother. She had used her last moments to shield her children from the crash. "Oh, little ones," Lucy whispered, "I am so sorry." The cubs watched her with terrified eyes. They were too young to understand what had happened, too young to know that their world had just ended. All they knew was that they were cold and scared and alone. Lucy reached out her hand slowly, giving them time to see that she meant no harm. The smallest cub, the one who had tried to roar, sniffed her gloved fingers with a wet nose. It let out another tiny sound, this one more confused than afraid. "I know," Lucy said softly. "I know you do not understand, but I am going to help you, I promise." She activated her communicator. "Grace, Ben, I found survivors. 3 cubs, maybe 2 or 3 months old. Their mother is dead. The whole family is gone except for them." There was a long pause before Ben responded. "Commander, what are you planning to do?" Lucy looked at the 3 small faces watching her, waiting for someone to tell them what would happen next. She thought about the High Command and their military training camps. She thought about the Galactic Council and their endless rules and regulations. She thought about everything she had read about this proud, fierce species and their belief that only strength mattered. Then she thought about what it meant to be human. "I am bringing them home," she said. She gathered the cubs carefully, one by one, tucking them against her chest where they could feel her warmth through the suit. They were so light, so fragile, nothing like the fearsome warriors they would someday become. Right now, they were just bobbies who needed someone to care for them. Lucy carried them out of the wreckage and into the light. Behind her, the broken ship sat silent and still, a grave for a family that had deserved better. Ahead, the Starward waited with its doors open and its crew ready to help. She did not know what would happen next. She did not know how the galaxy would react to a human raising cubs, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was not going to let these children face the universe alone. The first 3 days aboard the Starward were difficult in ways Lucy had not expected. The cubs refused to eat. Grace prepared formula based on nutritional data, mixing proteins and vitamins in careful amounts. But every time Lucy tried to feed them, they turned their heads away and whimpered. They huddled together in the corner of the storage room she had converted into a temporary den, their small bodies shaking with fear and grief. Lucy spent hours sitting near them, talking in a low and gentle voice. She told them about Earth, about oceans and forests and cities full of people. She told them about her childhood home in a small town where everyone knew everyone else. She told them stories her grandmother had told her, old tales about brave heroes and happy endings. The cubs did not understand her words, but they seemed to find comfort in the sound of her voice. On the third night, the smallest cub crawled out of the pile and approached her. Lucy held very still, barely breathing, as the tiny creature sniffed her hand and then climbed into her lap. It was warm and soft, and it trembled against her stomach like a frightened bird. Lucy stroked its fur with careful fingers, feeling the rapid beat of its heart slow down bit by bit. "There you go," she murmured. "You are safe now, I have got you." The cub looked up at her with golden eyes and made a small sound, somewhere between a purr and a whine. Then it opened its mouth and accepted the formula from the feeding bottle Grace had prepared. After that, things got easier. The other two cubs followed their siblings' example, and soon all three were eating and drinking normally. Lucy named them based on their personalities. The smallest and bravest she called Ember for the spark of courage she saw in his eyes. The middle one, who loved shiny objects and spent hours batting at buttons and clips, she named Cinder. The largest, a gentle giant who preferred soft things and quiet corners, became Spark. Ben watched all of this with a mixture of worry and wonder. He had never been comfortable around aliens, especially predator species, but even he had to admit that the cubs were not what he had expected. They played like kittens, tumbling over each other and chasing anything that moved. They slept in warm piles, their small snores filling the ship with a sound that was almost peaceful. They looked at Lucy with interest that seemed impossible for creatures born to be warriors. "They think you are their mother," Grace observed one evening, watching Ember curl up on Lucy's chest while she read reports on her data pad. "I am the closest thing they have," Lucy replied. "That will have to be enough." She spent her free time researching customs, trying to understand what the cubs needed beyond food and shelter. What she found surprised her. Society was built on ritual and tradition, with specific behaviors marking every stage of life. Cubs were expected to participate in these rituals from birth, learning the patterns that would shape their identity as members of a pride. The most important ritual was the morning report. Every dawn, cubs presented themselves to their pride mother. They brought small objects, tokens of their vigilance during the night, proof that they had stayed alert and ready even while the adults slept. It was an instinct, hardwired into their biology from thousands of years of evolution on a dangerous. Cubs who did not give morning reports became anxious and withdrawn. Cubs who were ignored when they tried to report often developed behavioral problems that lasted their entire lives. Lucy read this information 3 times, making sure she understood. Then she set her alarm for 30 minutes before the ship's artificial dawn. The next morning she was sitting in the converted den when the cubs began to stir. Ember was the first to wake, his golden eyes blinking in the dim light. He looked around the room, sniffing the air, and then his gaze landed on Lucy. Something changed in his expression, a kind of recognition that went deeper than thought. He stood on unsteady legs and tottered toward her. Clamped in his tiny jaws was a crumpled piece of paper, something he must have found during the night. He dropped it at her feet and let out a rumbling sound that was probably meant to be impressive but came out as a squeak. Lucy picked up the paper with careful hands. "Thank you, Ember," she said seriously. "This is a very good report. You did well." Ember's whole body wiggled with pride. He climbed into her lap and pressed his face against her chest, purring so hard his small frame vibrated. Cinder woke next, and she brought a button she had somehow off one of the storage containers. Spark offered a sock he had stolen from Ben's laundry pile. Lucy accepted each gift with the same grave attention, praising the cubs and stroking their fur until they settled into a contented heap around her. This became their daily ritual. Every morning, without fail, the cubs brought her their treasures. Ember favored practical items like food wrappers and broken clips. Cinder collected anything that sparkled, building a small hoard of stolen jewelry and metal scraps. Spark preferred soft things, and Lucy often found her towels and blankets mysteriously relocated to his corner of the den. Ben complained about the missing items. Grace started hiding her earrings, but Lucy just smiled and made sure she was always there when the cubs woke, always ready to receive their morning reports. "You know this cannot last," Ben said one afternoon, watching Spark drag a pillowcase across the floor. "They will come for them eventually. They do not let their young be raised by other species." "I know," Lucy replied. "So what are you going to do?" She did not answer right away. Instead, she watched Spark deposit the pillowcase in his nest and then look up at her with satisfied eyes. He had worked hard for this prize. He wanted her to be proud of him. "I am going to make sure they know they are loved," Lucy said finally. "Whatever happens after that, at least they will have this." Ben shook his head but said nothing more. He did not understand, not really. He had not seen the cubs in that dark cargo hold, trembling under their dead mother's body. He had not felt their small hearts beating against his chest as he carried them to safety. But Lucy remembered. She would always remember. The days turned into weeks, and the cubs grew stronger. They learned to recognize the sound of Lucy's footsteps in the corridor and would race to greet her whenever she approached. They learned that Grace was gentle and would sneak them extra treats when Lucy was not looking. They learned that Ben was grumpy but would play with them if they bothered him enough. They learned that humans were strange creatures who did not have claws or fangs or fur, but who gave warmth and food and safety anyway. Lucy knew the message had gone out through the relay stations. She knew the Galactic Council was aware of what she had done. She knew the High Command would eventually demand answers. But for now, in this small ship drifting through the darkness between stars, none of that mattered. What mattered was Ember's proud squeak when he presented his morning report. What mattered was Cinder's delighted chirp when she found something shiny. What mattered was Spark's contented sigh when he finally got his pillowcase arranged just right. What mattered was 3 small lives that had been given a second chance. Lucy held that thought close to her heart and waited for the galaxy to catch up with her. The transmission came on day 12, just as Lucy had known it would. She was in the middle of feeding the cubs when the communication alert sounded. Ember was balanced on her knee, slurping formula from a bottle with loud enthusiasm. Cinder and Spark were wrestling on the floor nearby, their tiny growls filling the room with noise. It was messy and chaotic and wonderful, and Lucy hated to leave it. But duty called, as it always did. She handed the cubs off to Grace and walked to the bridge. Ben was already there, his face tight with worry. On the main, a familiar symbol glowed against the darkness of space. The seal of the Galactic Council, that great assembly of species that pretended to govern the galaxy through diplomacy and compromise. Lucy had dealt with them before. She had never enjoyed it. She accepted the transmission, and the face of Ambassador Kel Vance appeared on the screen. He was a thin man with sharp features and careful eyes, the kind of diplomat who measured every word before speaking it. Lucy had met him twice at formal functions and had disliked him both times. "Commander Hart," Kel said, his voice smooth and practiced. "Thank you for accepting this communication. I trust you are well." "I am fine, Ambassador. What can I do for you?" "I think you know why I am calling." Kel's expression did not change, but something in his tone hardened. "Word has reached the Council about your recent rescue mission. The High Command has been informed that you are currently in possession of 3 of their cubs." "I am not in possession of them," Lucy said carefully. "I am caring for them. There is a difference. The distinction may be lost on the, I am afraid. They are a proud species, Commander. They do not appreciate outsiders involving themselves in their internal matters." Lucy felt her jaw tighten. Their internal matters. 3 children lost their entire family in a crash. They were alone and terrified. What was I supposed to do, leave them there to die? "Of course not. Your rescue was commendable, but the cubs belong with their own kind. The High Command is dispatching a retrieval vessel as we speak. They should arrive within 3 days. The word hit Lucy like a punch to the stomach. Retrieval. As if the cubs were lost property, packages to be collected and returned to their rightful owners. She thought of Ember's proud morning reports, Cinder's shiny treasures, Spark's soft nest of stolen bedding. She thought of how far they had come in just 12 days, how much they had learned to trust. "What happens to them when they arrive?" she asked. Kel hesitated just for a moment. "They will be placed in appropriate care." "What kind of care, Ambassador? Be specific." Another pause, longer this time. "Orphaned cubs are assigned to military training facilities. It is their tradition. They will be raised alongside other young warriors and given the skills they need to serve their people." "They are 3 months old," Lucy said, her voice flat. "They still need to be fed by hand. They cry when they wake up in the dark, and you want to send them to a military camp." "It is not about what I want, Commander. It is about respecting the customs of a sovereign species. They have raised their young this way for thousands of years. We have no right to interfere." Lucy stared at the screen, at Kel's composed face and careful eyes. She thought about all the rules and regulations that governed space, all the treaties and agreements that kept different species from going to war with each other. She understood why those rules existed. She understood the importance of diplomacy. But she also understood something else, something that went deeper than politics and tradition. "Tell them to turn around," she said. Kel blinked. "I am sorry." "The retrieval vessel. Tell them to turn around. I am not handing over these cubs." The ambassador's careful composure cracked just slightly. "Commander Hart, I do not think you understand the situation. The do not make requests. They make demands. If you refuse to cooperate, they will consider it an act of aggression against their entire species. Then they can come and tell me that themselves. This is madness. You are risking a diplomatic incident over 3 children who are not even your own species. Think about what you are doing." Lucy thought about it. She thought about the Galactic Council and their endless meetings, their careful calculations of risk and benefit. She thought about the High Command and their ancient traditions, their belief that only strength mattered. She thought about all the powerful forces in the universe that would line up against her if she held her ground. Then she thought about Ember, sitting on her chest at dawn, dropping a crumpled wrapper on her face with such pride in his tiny eyes. "I have thought about it," she said. "My answer is no." She cut the transmission before Kel could respond. Ben stared at her with wide eyes. "Commander, do you have any idea what you just did? They are going to be furious. They could send a warship. They could demand your arrest. They could start a conflict that drags in half the galaxy." "Maybe," Lucy agreed. "Or maybe they will listen." "Listen to what?" "To a better idea." She turned and walked back to the converted den, where Grace was trying to keep Cinder from eating a data chip. The cubs saw Lucy enter and immediately abandoned their games, rushing toward her with happy chirps and squeaks. Ember climbed up her leg. Spark pressed against her ankle. Cinder brought her the data chip as a gift. Lucy gathered them close and held them tight. She could feel their small hearts beating, their warm breath against her skin. They trusted her completely, without reservation or doubt. They believed she would keep them safe because that was what mothers did. She was not going to let them down. "Grace," she said quietly, "I need you to help me research psychology. Everything you can find about how they make decisions, what they value, what might convince them to change their minds." Grace nodded slowly. "You are going to try to negotiate with them." "I am going to try something. I do not know if it will work, but I have to try." The next 3 days were tense. Lucy spent hours reading about culture, searching for any weakness in their rigid traditions. Ben kept the ship's sensors trained on the approaching retrieval vessel, tracking its progress through space. Grace cared for the cubs and tried to keep everyone calm. The cubs themselves seemed unaware of the danger. They continued their routines, bringing morning reports and playing in the corridors and sleeping in warm piles. They had no idea that powerful forces were gathering to tear them away from the only family they had left. Lucy watched them and made a promise. She did not speak it out loud, but she felt it in her bones. No matter what happened, no matter who came for them, she would fight for these children. She would stand between them and anyone who tried to hurt them. She would be their shield, their protector, their mother in every way that mattered. They believed that only strength mattered. Lucy was about to show them a different kind of strength. The kind that came from love. The warship dropped out of hyperspace like a predator, emerging from shadows. Lucy stood on the bridge and watched it approach on the ship was massive, easily 10 times the size of the Starward. its hull bristling with weapons that could reduce her vessel to atoms in seconds. The design was aggressive, all sharp angles and dark metal, built to inspire fear in anyone who saw it. It worked. Lucy felt fear, but she did not let it show. "They are hailing us," Ben said, his voice tight. "Accept the transmission." The screen flickered and a face appeared. He was old, Lucy could tell, with scars crossing his muzzle and one eye clouded by an old wound. His remaining eye was bright amber, sharp and intelligent, studying her with obvious contempt. "I am High Talon," he said. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. "You are the human who stole our cubs." "I rescued them," Lucy replied, "from a crashed ship where their entire family died. But yes, I am Commander Lucy Hart." Slip curled back, showing fangs as long as her fingers. "You will surrender them to me immediately. They belong with their own kind." "I would like to discuss that with you in person." The eye narrowed. "There is nothing to discuss. Hand over the cubs or face the consequences." "Come aboard my ship," Lucy said calmly. "Come see them with your own eyes. Then tell me they belong in a military camp instead of a home." Was silent for a long moment. Lucy could see him calculating, trying to understand what game she was playing. Did not negotiate. They did not compromise. They took what they wanted by force and expected everyone else to submit. But something in her words had caught his attention. Maybe it was her confidence. Maybe it was her complete lack of fear, even facing a warship that could destroy her. Or maybe he was simply curious about the strange little human who had dared to defy his entire species. "Very well," he said finally. "I will come aboard, alone and unarmed as you wish. But this changes nothing, Commander. Those cubs will leave with me." "We will see," Lucy said, and cut the transmission. Ben grabbed her arm. "Are you insane? You are inviting a warrior onto our ship. He could kill all of us with his bare hands." "He will not." "How do you know?" Lucy smiled, though it did not reach her eyes. "Because I have something he wants, and he will not get it by killing me." She went to the airlock and waited. Through the porthole, she watched a small shuttle detach from the warship and glide toward the starward. It docked with a gentle bump, and the airlock cycled open. Was even more impressive in person. He towered over Lucy by nearly 3 feet, his body thick with muscle beneath his golden fur. His claws were retracted but still visible, curved and sharp. His face was unreadable as he stepped onto her ship and looked around with obvious disdain. "Small," he said. "Weak. How do you humans survive in space with such pathetic vessels?" "We manage," Lucy replied. "Follow me, please." She led him through the corridors toward her quarters, where the cubs were waiting. Moved with predatory grace, his eye taking in every detail of the ship. Lucy could feel his presence behind her like heat from a fire, dangerous and overwhelming. She stopped at the door. "Before we go in, I need you to understand something. These cubs have been through a trauma. They lost their mother, their father, their entire world. They are just beginning to feel safe again. If you scare them, if you make them feel threatened in any way, this conversation is over." Looked down at her with something that might have been amusement. "You are giving orders to a High Talon of the fleet. I am telling you how to behave around children. There is a difference." For a moment she thought he might strike her. His claws twitched and a low growl rumbled in his chest. But then he nodded just slightly and the tension eased. "Show me," he said. Lucy opened the door. The cubs were in their corner, tangled together in their nest of blankets and stolen bedding. Ember was awake, his golden eyes fixed on the door. When he saw the massive warrior enter, he let out a tiny hiss that was more cute than threatening. Froze in place. His eye moved from the cubs to their nest, taking in every detail. Lucy watched his face carefully, looking for any sign of what he was thinking. "They made a den," he said slowly. His voice had changed, softer than before. "They made a home," Lucy corrected. "Watch." She walked to her bunk and sat down on the edge. Immediately, Cinder's head popped up from the pile. She saw Lucy and let out a happy chirp, scrambling over her siblings to reach her. She climbed into Lucy's lap and began to purr, pressing her face against Lucy's chest. Spark woke next, stretching and yawning before padding over to join his sister. He carried a sock in his mouth, his morning offering, which he dropped in Lucy's lap with obvious pride. Ember was last. He approached more carefully, keeping one eye on the whole time, but his instincts were stronger than his fear. He climbed up beside Lucy and presented his own gift, a piece of wire twisted into a rough spiral. "Thank you, Ember," Lucy said seriously. "This is excellent work. You did very well." Ember's whole body wiggled with happiness. He settled against her side, his tiny claws kneading her uniform as he purred. Watched all of this in silence. His face was still unreadable, but something had changed in his eye, something that looked almost like pain. "They give you morning reports," he said. "Every day. They bring me treasures they find during the night. I accept each one and praise them for their vigilance. It makes them feel safe. It makes them feel valued." "That is a pride ritual. How do you know about our customs?" "I researched. I wanted to understand what they needed." Was quiet for a long time. The only sound in the room was the purring of the cubs, soft in content. Finally, he spoke again, and his voice was barely above a whisper. "I was taken to the training camps when I was 2 months old. I do not remember my mother's face. I do not remember her scent. I do not remember anyone ever accepting my morning reports." Lucy felt her heart squeeze in her chest. "What do you remember?" "Cold, hunger, fear." He paused. "They taught us that these things made us strong, that comfort was weakness, that love was a lie told to children who would never survive the real world." He looked at the cubs, at their peaceful faces and relaxed bodies, at the way they pressed against Lucy as if she was the center of their universe. "They are not afraid," he said. "They feel safe." "Yes." "No cub feels safe. Not ever. We are taught from birth that the universe is dangerous and that only the strong survive." Lucy met his amber eye. What if that is wrong? What if there is another way? Stared at her for a long moment. Then he did something Lucy never expected. He sat down on the floor, folding his massive body into a surprisingly small space. He did not approach the cubs. He did not try to touch them. He just sat there, watching them with an expression that Lucy could only describe as longing. "Tell me about this other way," he said. And Lucy began to talk. 6 months had passed since Lucy Hart made the decision that changed everything. The sanctuary stood on Port Caldera, a neutral station at the crossroads of a dozen trade routes. It had taken weeks of negotiation to secure the location, weeks more to build the facilities, and countless arguments with both the Galactic Council and the High Command. But somehow, against all odds, they had made it work. The Human Youth Sanctuary was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Lucy walked through the main corridor, past rooms filled with sleeping cubs and busy caretakers. The walls were painted in warm colors, reds and oranges and golds that reminded of their distant. Soft mats covered the floors for playing and wrestling. Small dens dotted every corner, built to specifications, but filled with the soft blankets and comfortable bedding that Lucy had learned the cubs loved. Ember, Cinder, and Spark were no longer the tiny creatures she had pulled from the wreckage. They were the size of large dogs now, their bodies sleek and strong, their golden fur thick and healthy. But they still followed her everywhere, still brought her morning reports, still curled up beside her whenever she sat down. They were waiting for her in the common room, along with 24 other cubs who had arrived over the past months. Orphans, abandoned, refugees from border conflicts. Cubs who had never known safety, never known comfort, never known that someone could love them simply because they existed. Lucy sat in her usual chair and the room erupted into motion. Cubs rushed toward her from every direction, clutching their morning treasures: a polished stone, a twisted piece of wire, a drawing made with clumsy paws, a report card from the education center, covered in gold stars and enthusiastic comments. She accepted each gift with the same serious attention she had shown from the very first day. Every cub got their moment, their praise, their reminder that they mattered. "Thank you, Cinder. This rock is beautiful." "Excellent work, Spark. Your reading scores are improving." "What a wonderful drawing, Flare. Is that supposed to be me? I love it." The cubs purred and chirped and wrestled with each other, filling the room with noise and life. Lucy watched them with a smile that reached deep into her heart. Entered the room, ducking his massive head to fit through the doorway. He had changed in the past 6 months. The harsh lines of his face had softened. His single eye, once so cold and calculating, now held warmth when he looked at the cubs. He had resigned his commission in the fleet to help build the sanctuary, and Lucy knew he had never regretted that choice. "Morning report complete?" he asked. "Almost." Lucy pointed to a small shape hiding behind a pillow fort in the corner. "Flicker has not come forward yet." Flicker was the arrival, a female cub barely weaned from her mother's milk. She had come to the sanctuary 3 weeks ago, traumatized and terrified, unable to trust anyone. Lucy had been working with her every day, patient and gentle, waiting for her to feel ready. Settled his bulk onto the floor nearby, careful not to crowd the frightened cub. "She will come when she is ready." "I know, but I worry about her." "You worry about all of them." Lucy smiled. "Someone has to." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the other cubs play. Ember had started a wrestling match with a younger male named Cole, teaching him the proper techniques while making sure he did not get hurt. Cinder was showing off her collection of shiny objects to an admiring audience. Spark had gathered a group of cubs around him and was reading them a story, his voice low and soothing. "They are so different from us," said quietly, "from what we were at their age. They are what children could always have been, if someone had just given them the chance." Movement caught Lucy's eye. Flicker was creeping out from behind her pillow fort, her small body pressed low to the ground. In her mouth she carried a crumpled piece of paper, clutched so tightly that her tiny teeth had poked holes through it. Lucy held very still. She did not call out or reach toward the cub. She just waited. Flicker approached in slow, careful steps. Her golden eyes were wide with fear, but something stronger than fear was pushing her forward. Need, hope, the desperate wish to belong somewhere to someone. She stopped at Lucy's feet and dropped the paper. Then she sat back on her haunches and let out a sound that was half whimper, half roar. "Thank you, Flicker," Lucy said, her voice steady despite the tears building in her eyes. "This is a wonderful gift. You did so well." She unfolded the paper carefully. It was a drawing, rough and simple, clearly made by someone who had never held a crayon before. But the image was unmistakable. A tall figure with no fur, surrounded by smaller figures with pointed ears and long tails. Underneath, in shaky letters that someone had helped Flicker write, was a single word: family. Lucy gathered the tiny cub into her arms, feeling the familiar vibration of a purr starting in Flicker's chest. Around her, the other cubs gathered close, drawn by the moment. Ember pressed against her shoulder. Cinder climbed onto the back of the chair. Spark settled at her feet with a contented sigh. Watched with something like wonder in his eye. "How do you do it?" he asked. "How do you make them trust so completely?" Lucy stroked Flicker's fur, feeling the cub relax against her. "I show up. Every day, every morning, no matter what. I accept their gifts and tell them they matter. I keep my promises. I never lie to them about who I am or what I can do. That is all. That is everything." She looked up at him, at this warrior who had spent his whole life believing that only strength mattered. "The think power comes from weapons and territory and conquest. But you are wrong. The real power, the kind that changes worlds, comes from something much simpler. What? Love, Lucy said, just love. The sanctuary grew over the following months and years. More cubs arrived, more volunteers joined, more resources flowed in from humans across the galaxy who had heard the story and wanted to help. The High Command grumbled and complained, but never tried to shut it down. Even they could see that something remarkable was happening. Cubs who had been broken and afraid were growing into confident young. They learned to read and write, to think and question, to care for each other, and for the humans who had given them a home. They still received military training, because insisted that they needed to know how to defend themselves. But they also learned art and music and science, things no had ever taught their young before. And every morning, without fail, they brought their reports. Lucy Hart was getting older now, her hair turning gray at the temples, her joints aching on cold station mornings. But she never missed a single dawn. She was always there, sitting in her chair, ready to accept whatever treasures the cubs had found in the night. Ember, fully grown now and nearly as tall as, still brought her gifts. A data chip with a program he had written, a report on his studies at the Engineering Academy, a letter of commendation from an admiral who had once called humans weak and pathetic. "I am proud of you," Lucy told him, just as she had told him that first morning on the Starward. "You have done so well." Ember's massive body pressed against her like he was still a tiny cub seeking comfort. His purr filled the room, deep and strong and happy. Across the galaxy, species still measured strength in weapons and territory and conquest. They fought wars over resources and pride and ancient grudges that no one remembered anymore. They believed that power was the only thing that mattered, that the universe was cruel and cold and caring was a weakness. But here in this small sanctuary on a neutral station, Lucy Hart knew better. She had proven that a different path was possible, that kindness was not weakness, that love was the strongest force in the universe. The cubs brought their morning reports, and Lucy Hart listened to every single one.